we've got one of our special partners from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Executive Director, Sir Rodger Voorhies. Welcome, sir, and thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me today.
Tell us, what do you do at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and what's your interest in this forum?
So I get the huge privilege of overseeing a lot of the foundation's work in economic development. So in my portfolio is our agricultural development and livestock work, our water sanitation and hygiene work, which is about reinventing the toilet, and how do we bring the half the world that doesn't have access to sanitation in a way that's sustainable and environmentally sound and actually works for low-income people, especially women. It's a big piece of our work I get to oversee is our financial inclusion work. And then our newest strategy in the foundation I couldn't be more excited around is we launched our gender equality strategy this year with a focus on women's economic empowerment. And really our early indicators are we want to try and close the financial inclusion gap for women, which is 9% in developing countries, but women's market integration in agriculture.
That's exciting stuff. And speaking from Rwanda, where they've just celebrated, is it 67% women parliamentarians? I think Africa is on the right footing.
Look, the potential of African women is unbelievable. And since we're at the AGRF, you know, one of the things that we've looked at really closely is the productivity gap between men and women on the continent.
What is causing that?
You know, it's probably a combination of a variety of things. One is lack of access to inputs and assets. So women just don't have the same access to the fertilizer, to seeds, to other kinds of soil health that men have, and that actually tends to hold them back.
So how will financial inclusion address those challenges?
So financial inclusion won't address the productivity gap in women's agriculture directly, but it will provide what is the second part of that, which is access to finance. So a big study was done which looked at what were the big drivers of the productivity gap, and access to finance was one of them. Around access to inputs was another one. In that access to finance, there are some countries in Africa where only 9% of women borrow in the formal sector. And yet, we're seeing some countries in Africa where the role of financial inclusion through mobile money has grown tremendously, and women have grown in the tens of millions as well, but they've not kept and closed the gap with men. And so that's one of our goals. The other couple of things that are holding women back are obviously unpaid work, and a lot of that is child rearing. And I think that's a really difficult one to tackle, but it's one that countries and NGOs on the continent are looking at. And overall, I think an FAO study that was done said that if women simply had access to the right inputs that men have and secured land title, or rather secure control over land, you could actually see an extra 20–30% increase in women's productivity, which is 100 to 150 million women moving out of food insecurity into food security.
Exciting stuff. Now, given our theme for this year is Lead, Measure, Grow, how are you going to measure the impact of your inputs into this financial inclusion agenda?
Across all of our work, both in agriculture and financial inclusion and water and sanitation, the Gates Foundation takes a really strong measurement approach to it. And when we added gender equality in this last year, what we did is one of our very first investments, even before the strategy was approved, we put in place over $40 million into gender disaggregated data, because what we found out was even some of the global surveys didn't gender disaggregate. So we couldn't understand how women were doing and where they were making gains and where they weren't. And you only get the outcomes that you measure. And so without half the population being understood, you wouldn't get the kind of economic outcomes and poverty and health outcomes we wanted. So we're super happy to see countries in Africa adopt the biennial review and begin to measure their agricultural productivity. And now we're trying to be supportive on our end on a number of data initiatives, including gender disaggregated data.
Excellent. Tomorrow is our last day of the conference, of the forum, but I'm sure you've had some wow moments Would you like to share any of those? Something that really struck your heart as, wow, AGRF is the forum for Africa.
So 2 things stand out to me. One is, because this is my 3rd AGRF, that there is a difference this year in the focus on ag ministers learning from each other. And not just talking about their aspiration and their hope, but how they're going to actually turn that hope into reality. Excellent. And the second is that the peer learning of what's not working and people not being afraid to share where things, either A, they don't know how to solve the problem, and B, where they've tried something that hasn't worked and they're willing to learn from a different country or a different peer. And I think that that kind of focus on data-led solutions, on measuring outcomes, not just inputs, and the ability to admit when things are not going right, I think has been a palpable change in this year's AGRF.
Excellent. There couldn't be a better way of working towards a green revolution than learning from each other. My last question to you.
Yeah.
How will you lead?
So obviously, given the loss earlier this year of Kofi Annan, who was really the founder of AGRA, I think we were all been challenged to say, how do we spend our life and time in a way that is impactful for others and not just for a particular goal? And last night at the AGR, or at the AGRA board dinner, we really celebrated Kofi's leadership, and it was a reminder to all of us of how we're going to step up and lead. And I think that having spent a big piece of my career on the continent, I think I'm really dedicated both professionally and personally to identifying what are the things that we can do in Seattle that's our role as a foundation, but then how do we come alongside partners in Africa and trust and support them in a data-driven way to really achieve their own goals for their country. So I'm not sure I have a particular thing that I'm going to do day to day, but what I can say is that we're going to stay committed as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I'm going to stay personally committed that we do not waste the incredible stewardship of resources we have, but actually invest in things that make meaningful difference in people's lives.
Thank you, Rodger. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Rodger, the Executive Director at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who's been inspired by the late Kofi Annan, whom we mourn but celebrate because his legacy lives on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.